Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we have such a treat for you. Jaclyn Bacon is joining us, and we're talking about high-functioning anxiety, what it looks like in your everyday life, what the common root causes are, and how it's connected with autoimmunity. Jaclyn illuminates the common pitfalls of the overachiever and gives us an amazing step to take to begin to shift into presence and step out of anxiety and illness. Jaclyn, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you with us today.
Thanks, Julie. I'm so excited to be here.
So one of the first things I usually ask our guests is, how did you get to be doing the wonderful work that you're doing? Because most of us have a personal story that brought us to this world. So can you share with listeners a little bit of your journey that got you into the functional medicine world?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, really getting into nurse practitioner school, I started out pretty disgruntled about the conventional system. So I was going through clinicals, learning it with ease, but I was like, man, in the family practice realm, so challenging to see people 10-minute visits, one after another with a multitude of complaints, and felt like we were only scratching the surface. So I felt that about 15 years ago. And that really led me into lifestyle medicine and integrative and functional medicine at a young age. I went down that road through my own medical training and whatnot, and then really got to experience it myself personally as well. So I have always been a very healthy person and high achiever. And then I came to a point where I was working as an MP, and I was on my second pregnancy and never experienced really anxiety that affected my life. Maybe it helped me excel in school and different things like that, but never created sleep problems or any issues until after my second pregnancy. And so that's where I was really experiencing some insomnia. I was feeling really fatigued and tired, but also wired and on edge and having difficulty unwinding. I literally would be watching a Netflix show and not be able to relax. That's when it's something's wrong. I should be able to unplug, but my nervous system was just on overdrive, and I was depleted after breastfeeding and all these pregnancies. And I went to my conventional providers as well as a functional medicine provider. And I wasn't getting any answers through the conventional insurance paradigm. They would do my labs, everything looked normal. I'm like, but this is totally new for me. I remember before I even had my first kid, I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to wake up in the middle of the night. I was such a deep sleeper. And now I can't even sleep well through the night. So it was this drastic change, but I didn't feel people were really looking deep enough to explain why for my symptoms. And so that's what really got me into the deep dive approach of functional medicine. And I did my own functional medicine labs. My gut had imbalances, so I wasn't digesting things as well. I had very early autoimmune conditions. So I had thyroid antibodies that were elevated, but my thyroid hormones were normal. So if I left that alone, I could have been on medication for life down the road. So I was like, okay, this explains some things. I was super depleted in magnesium, which is your relaxant mineral, and which is no surprise after pregnancy and breastfeeding that I was so depleted and had some inflammation going on. And then I also had kind of my upbringing and conditioning that led to all of this. So I was so grateful for more clarity of the answers and then more of a holistic approach. I was able to really unravel things and do the deep work and reverse these symptoms for good, rather than just feeling, which I was starting to feel in the conventional realm, see provider after provider, no answers, get thrown more pills at myself. And I'm like, this, and even when I was doing better, I was getting thrown more pills at me. I was like, this just doesn't seem right. Like, and I had that background, and so I had to kind of exit personally myself out of that conventional spiral of just being victim to the system almost, as a patient, and take my power back of my health. And hey, let's get to the root cause. And that was like mind-blowing experience for myself that then led me into the work, because I'm like, I wanted this level of care as a mother, as a high achiever, as, a working, functioning, high level person, and not to just be like medicated for life and kind of like, here you go, 5-minute visit. Like that wasn't the solution I wanted. So really providing the level of care that I wanted for women now.
Yeah, which is amazing. And your story is so familiar. Because, and I'm guessing at some point, somebody alluded to the fact of, well, you have young kids. Of course, you're exhausted or stressed or, it's always, especially when labs are normal, especially when they're not running complete labs.
Right.
But I would imagine, and you touched on it, like how do you practice that medicine after that? Like you have to provide that service. This is why we do what we do.
Right.
And use the words, take my power back. I run a challenge, take your power back from autoimmunity. That is why we're having this conversation today. We can inspire one listener to, dig deeper and look to some of those root causes.
Yeah.
And maybe go beyond the care that they've already received.
For sure.
What I love was so exciting to me about your story is that you basically prevented autoimmunity or prevented any kind of permanent damage from it. And so that's one of the other reasons I wanted to bring your story to listeners, because I share my story. I was 11 years in and 10 prescriptions, and the exciting part is here I am, with RA that, they tell you if you don't take the drugs, you're going to have permanent damage. No, my life is amazing. I feel so great.
That's awesome.
But there's something, so I would love when it'll be exciting when we get to a point where enough people know that they can turn things around right away. And to
early detection, like we're doing early detection for other diseases. Why aren't we checking antibodies proactively?
Yeah.
And no level of antibodies is essentially normal physiologically for our body, right?
Right. We should not be attacking our own tissue, period. Like no matter what. Right. Yeah. So so those are just the things that I wanted to just recycle of this whole, like, we can do it early, trust yourself. Like so many things I hear in your story are those are the drums I beat. Like nobody knows you like you do. And so if your doctors look at your beautiful labs and tell you you're fine and you don't feel fine, find another avenue.
Right. Yeah. And how disempowering and confusing that can be. Like if we're getting cues from our body to listen to our body, I need help. It's communicating to us. And then we're like, oh, you're fine. Go on your merry way. It's like, okay, so I'm just supposed to survive feeling like crap, essentially. And then it kind of creates this mistrust almost with your own body, or like it's not on your side. It is 100% on our side.
Yes.
We just need the appropriate answers and tools to guide and support it. And that isn't often found with autoimmune conditions or chronic nagging symptoms in the conventional realm, unfortunately, present day, right? Correct. Amazing for acute illness, amazing for surgery.
I say that all the time. God forbid, I need acute care. I am going to the Western medical system. That's where I'm headed immediately.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So So you touched on anxiety, and I was thinking as you were just saying, this whole, as we're talking about trusting your body, right? And knowing that those symptoms you're experiencing are signals. That is your body's way of crying for help.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine, as somebody who is already in this anxiety pattern, that being told you're fine, and then, who do you trust? Like you're a trained medical provider, and the medical providers are telling you you're fine. So I just can imagine that would just fuel the anxiety and continue that pattern. You talk about this idea of high functioning anxiety. Can you share with us? I love that, by the way. Can you share with us what that looks like in our everyday lives? Because so many of us hear anxiety and we think of crippling anxiety, right? We think of somebody who is, really in a bad place. Yes. That's really interfering with their daily life. And so you alluded to, which is, I just get really excited. You're like, I think having a little anxiety is what made me a go-getter, right? It does go hand in hand with being a high achiever. So, explain to us what you mean by high functioning anxiety. What does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. So high functioning anxiety is way more common than the diagnosis of anxiety. And so it will commonly show up in our day-to-day life. Like you said, it's like those overachievers, people who might overcommit. They have a difficult time saying no, and they're your yes people. And so they might overwork, find themselves really immersing in their work, career. They're often big people pleasers. And so they are like prioritizing other people's needs before their own. They may have difficulty just like being present. So they're always busybodies, on the go, perfectionist tendencies, high achievers, but difficulty just being. And you'll kind of find those patterns in a lot of people and in a lot of successful people. Mm-hmm. And that can be the pros of high functioning anxiety, but then there's the bad that comes with it.
Which is
yeah.
Just so far, I'm like, okay, I can see, I hear things, with different ears because I know what the cons are, but it's like, drive, like, so some of that really does equate to drive and achievement. But the key was that, they hard to be in the present moment. You mentioned in your own story, can't unplug, right?
Yes.
And that's, what do you hear all the time about high achievers? You hear the word burnout, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, but let's get into, this high functioning anxiety, you're not, it's not debilitating.
Right.
It may even be helping in certain areas of your life. Right. What are some of the negative consequences?
Yeah. So you might see some of the positive effects in your career, but you may see some of the negative effects more in your interpersonal relationships. So, your social life may compromise if you're overworking, not really having the most secure relationships. So you might have like anxious attachment patterns in your relationships. And so seeing that play out, a lot of really high functioning people, you'll see that commonly in their relationships too. And if you're unable to fully be present, imagine that's going to affect your relationships, of course. That's also going to affect your work, even though you might idolize productivity. It won't be a positive thing often when you're distracted or you're always busy or you're always on, that difficulty just relaxing and enjoying. So when you have these perfectionist tendencies, we tend to be overcritical of ourselves, and we tend to not feel like we're always good enough or compare yourself to others, and lacking just contentment and acceptance of what is. So what I kind of found my previous pattern is I was living in this place unknowingly of resistance. So okay, I felt uncomfortable stress, or I felt uncomfortable symptoms. Well, I wasn't plugged into my body enough to almost be in touch with that.
Right.
And then I would resist that anxiety. And I would just turn externally. I would focus on other people's needs. I would overwork. I would go, distract, numb, right? We all do this by different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just that resistance though of your own anxiety, it makes it so much worse. Oh my gosh. It just like this spiral. So if we're able to get into a place of awareness and shift that first, and then meet our needs and accept what is, that is huge. But that really takes some practice and like training that muscle and rewiring of our brain, neuroplasticity, but it's so possible.
So very, very possible. And what about some of the, here we're on Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Yeah. How does that play into autoimmunity? What are some of the physical consequences of not creating that change, right? Not shifting.
Right. Yeah. I love looking at the root causes of, like, say in this instance with high function anxiety, what are the root causes of that? Right. So we really need to get a really detailed intake to evaluate that from a whole person perspective. And that I find is very much missing in the conventional realm, right?
Yes.
So one part I find very much missing is looking at trauma from our background.
Yep.
So, looking at adverse childhood experiences, and it's not, when we hear trauma, just like you were saying with anxiety, we hear the word trauma. It doesn't have
to be a capital T. It could be a little t. Yeah.
Right. It's not these overt abuse always, right? It can be these kind of nagging emotional neglect, or our caregivers not exhibiting their own boundaries, not having their own, they're coping with alcohol or with overworking themselves, So that conditioning, and what we've been taught to not listen to our own needs, not to cope in healthy ways, to perform in order to get rewarded. High achievers, they're doing well in school. Well, that's not just by chance, typically.
Sure.
That often was rewarded by our culture and conditioning. And so, being aware of that aspect of our background, but then beyond that, the physical aspects are huge, like you were saying. So the root causes, to really diving deep through functional medicine testing, really looks under the surface to why are we experiencing these symptoms? And that could be a multitude of things you're alluding to. So one common pattern we find with anxiety, which is just a symptom, and also autoimmune conditions as a root cause, is really our gut health, right?
I knew you were going there because it's so true.
Come on, Julie. So, our gut health, that is one of our most protective barriers from the external environment. And so when you have the symptom of anxiety, you have to think of a couple things. One, is there neuroinflammation going on? Is there inflammation of brain? Is there leaky gut, impermeability of your gut that's then causing leaky brain and inflammation of your brain? Yeah, you're going to have brain fog. Yeah, you're going to have, decreased mental clarity and cognition and poor memory retention and anxiety and possibly depression. Of course, you're going to experience those things if your gut is imbalanced. Not only that, just the permeability of your gut, but these good bacteria that actually help make your neurotransmitters, 90% of our serotonin, that happy hormone, in our gut. And so if we have these imbalances in that ecosystem of our gut, we're not going to have good nutrients. We're not going to have good neurotransmitters. We're not going to have optimal, deep restorative sleep. We're going to get more autoimmune issues because 2/3 of our immune function is in our gut. So it's like, man, if we can get a really good assessment of your ecosystem and microbiome, that gives so much clarity to the root cause and help guiding other aspects of care.
It is so, I know some listeners may be like, oh, the gut again, like this is all anybody wants to talk about. But I want to repeat the two things that you said that often people really genuinely don't realize, which feels like newer information, is that most of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut. They're not made in our brain.
Right.
And as you just said, over 2/3 of our immune system is in our gut. So this, why are they always talking about gut with autoimmunity? Why are we talking about gut with mental health and mood?
Right.
Because it really is that basic.
Our second brain. Yeah.
It is. And it almost may be the first one.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes in time.
In the research, it'll probably be renamed, I'm sure.
And so it is fascinating to see the impact on gut healing.
Yes.
On both things, anxiety, autoimmunity. It is unbelievable. I can't tell you how many clients I've had with really lifelong anxiety issues. And then, no coincidence, a laundry list of autoimmune diagnoses.
Right.
And they'll be doing really well. I have this one in particular keeps coming to mind, would be doing better. Right. And then the anxiety would come flooding back and the depression would be terrible. And we would check in and I'd say, well, what's going on? I had birthday cake last week and I'm like, you see the pattern between what you're doing with your gut? And literally that was like direct feedback of,
right.
And it's not, I'm oversimplifying. There's more to it than that, but it is always fascinating to me to see, because I think I used to be on the other side where I had no understanding of it. And I was like, I don't understand. What does what you're eating have to do with your mood? And how does anxiety play into autoimmunity,
Right. And I love taking it that step. We will look often as humans, we'll look at our behavior and just want to go straight there. Let's change the behavior. Let's change that food. Let's change that. But even taking a step back and saying, why are we engaging in that behavior?
Right.
So we all cope in different ways.
That goes back to have to identify the trauma.
Right.
And handle, and to change those patterns.
Yeah.
You have to know why they're there. Yeah. All of our patterns served us at one time. Like you were saying, that being that overachiever really probably got that positive attention or relief from negative attention as a child,
right?
To get those good grades or go after, whether it's athletics, academics, doesn't matter. And again, those are things that seem to serve us on the surface, but they create these patterns that expire, that are
as adults. They serve us as children. We have to adapt to our environment, and we have to we're dependent on other people then. So the coping mechanisms we use then are very different than what creates a very balanced and resilient adult. And there's kind of this bridge in time, and we just aren't taught healthy coping skills as children, or like how to have self-awareness and meet our own needs. It's one of the most overlooked things, I think, as us as humans, what we're doing in our education system. But I see it starting to evolve, which is powerful.
It is. I see a lot of younger people. I was thinking the same thing. We send our kids to school and they're taught, don't trust your instincts. And, all of that, the creativities, take all of these things.
Right. Yeah.
Suppress. And then, when we decide to, handle all of it as adults and relearn like what really does serve us, I do see, for me, I think I was in my 30s and already diagnosed with autoimmunity before I got a glimpse of like, maybe I don't want to raise my kids that way. Maybe there's another way, so that they don't have to undo all of this in their 30s and 40s or 20s and 30s. Right. So I do see it shifting, but it again, as you said, we weren't taught these skills. There's still a lot of, the kids are only being raised with the level of which their parents have dealt with their stuff. Right. So it's
the parents, their teachers, like all these people that are around. And I found it interesting. I hear that story commonly when you mentioned when you became a mom, how that's when we kind of look at our own stuff a little more. And that was definitely my situation too.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't want the same thing for my kids. And it makes you look at, you can't just say, most people apparently my counselor, she's like, yeah, most people will just try to compensate and do the opposite of their childhood.
Right.
But you're really not dealing with your stuff still.
Right.
You're just attempting on the external to like, oh, I'm going to do different. But if we can look within and really, we can stop that generational, trauma habits. So that's the most powerful as far as that. But of course, all this stuff leads to more physical causes. And if we have that sympathetic nervous system constantly activated, not only gut health, but our hormones and thyroid health. And it's just this like,
well, you said you weren't sleeping, right? Like, I mean, it all plays together. And that's why the approach of what's your symptom, here's your pill doesn't work, because,
right.
It's
not looking at the why.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talk about these root causes of the anxiety and the autoimmunity, and we're talking about trauma and neuroplasticity, all these amazing things, because it keeps coming back to what you said. We do have the power. We have the power. We have the power to improve our health. We have the power to create new parenting opportunities. We don't have to either repeat the same pattern. I mean, that used to be how it was, right? With the family dynamic, we either repeated or we did the opposite, which was often just as unhealthy, the just opposite. Right. And we're not stuck with that. We do have the power, if we're willing to learn and grow, to create whole new opportunities and shift our family experiences. But
it's the best.
What are some of the tools that people can use to help reduce that anxiety and improve that, and maybe, avoid autoimmunity or turn it around quickly like you did?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I always go back to the top 3 root causes. If you kind of look at them very big picture wise, it will often come down to stress. And that could be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, right? So stress is 1, 2, nutrition, and then 3, toxins. So every individual, the root causes of those and the priorities will be different at any given time. But let's just talk with one that is generalized, everybody can benefit from. And yes, we can look at our backgrounds and do that work with an amazing trauma-informed counselor or provider. But regardless of where you're at with your background, everybody who lives in a modern society can benefit from nervous system regulation. And so I'd love to, give some tips on how we can do that super practically, because it doesn't need to be a big thing, and incorporate that in our daily life.
Because you just touched on, I think that's some of the biggest resistance. People think it has to be like, I don't have time to go to a cave and meditate for 30 days uninterrupted. Right. I'm like, no, that's not actually what you need to do.
Yeah, right.
So, that would be great. Let's go there. What can we do?
So, we have the fight or flight system versus our rest and digest. We want that rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system relaxation more, not this constant activation of fight or flight like most of our modern society is. So how can we intentionally do that? By engaging and really biohacking our nervous system with practical tools day to day. So those parasympathetic nervous system tips that are just transformational, and play with it, like experiment with the ones that you enjoy. And first, I would recommend attaching simply to an existing habit. So a couple things is I love building self-awareness first. So when you build self-awareness, that is not only impactful on its own, checking in with yourself, but it then directs your future behaviors and how to meet your needs. So that would look like a simple self-check-in. And so that could be while you're doing existing habit and brushing your teeth in the morning. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, what am I feeling like? Rating your stress level 0 to 10, naming an emotion or 2 you're feeling, naming like, what is my physical energy like 0 to 10? What's my mental clarity like? So you already have an intake in the day of your capacity. And so you can you're not pushing through and burning yourself out more. You're like, man, if my stress is already a 4 and I'm just waking up, okay, well, I can take some deep breaths and calm that down pretty quick. But if you wait until your stress level is an 8 later in the day, oh, that takes so much more time, energy, and effort to decrease, right? So it's all about that earlier cues and awareness so we can nourish ourselves. We can meet our own needs very simply. And it literally takes like 2 minutes to do that.
It's amazing. And I love literally to say that we speak the same language would be an understatement.
I love it, Julie.
Because I'm always saying like awareness is the first step. You can't create change if you don't know where you are. You need to know where you are,
right,
where you want to go. Then you can start to move the needle. And literally everything, I mentioned that challenge that I run sometimes, literally everything that the check-ins, those are all on like the first day they get a track.
Cool.
Because again, as you were saying, these are the thing when you're in that go, right? Next thing, you have to be present to do that check-in. Right. And so many people haven't been present in a really long time. And so I love that. And even for those of you that are listening on audio, I was brushing my teeth with my imaginary toothbrush, as she was saying, when you brush your teeth in the morning.
Yeah, totally.
Because this stuff really, really does work.
It does.
And so
when you were saying about being present, our brain literally can't be anxious and thinking about the future or past if we're in the moment present.
Yeah.
So if we're engaging our
depression is when you're stuck in the past and anxiety is when you're stuck in the future. Present, that's where it's at. It's right. But it takes training. It is a muscle. We definitely, but the fun thing is even just the shift from doing that check-in exercise. Yeah. Is you get rewarded and it just starts to build on itself.
Like, oh, wow. I didn't even realize I was feeling sad about that. And that's why I've been numbing and watching more shows or drinking wine or whatever.
Yeah. And you mentioned, looking for the unplug, right? Yeah. That sometimes is elusive. And you mentioned how much more difficult and longer it takes to address, a stress level of an 8. Right. But often until you start doing these check-ins and just dipping your toe into some presence, sometimes literally you don't feel a 4. You have you don't even feel the difference between a 4 and an 8. You're just constantly
in your brain going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I love that. So I always ask what's one step listeners can take, but you just gave us, and yes, it had multiple parts, but I'm going to umbrella it under just the check-in, right? Hopefully everybody brushes their teeth in the morning.
If not, morning coffee, maybe.
I do have one client who, when we started working on toxins and I got him to understand, what was in the toothpaste he was using. Yeah. He, for about 2 weeks, just didn't get clean toothpaste and just stopped using toothpaste. And I'm like, oh, well, probably better, but your poor girlfriend. I was like, and deodorant. He did the same with both at the same time. I was like,
he was dedicated.
That's amazing. I'm glad you are no longer, putting toxins in your mouth and under your arms.
That's the most important part anyhow, the brushing action.
So, but even he was still brushing. So when you brush in the morning, start to do that check-in. I love it. And I love
ourselves first. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of it, you and I, we're giggling and it's simple and it's fun and it's not simple. Like it is simple in that you can do it in less than 2 minutes. Right. But so many people, you mentioned, name an emotion I'm feeling. I
didn't even know how to do that at first. I literally didn't have that skill to identify my emotions.
Yeah.
So, and that's common.
It's very common. And so I just wanted to acknowledge for anybody who is
it's going to feel weird.
Pick up this exercise that, yes, we're saying it's simple in that it's a small step to create huge change,
Right.
but that it will take practice, and some of it will be uncomfortable when you start.
Yeah, especially in the beginning, and trust in that and making it fun. That's what keeps you engaged, and realizing the positive feedback. How you continue to build habits is our brain is always looking for the negative for survival. But if we look for the positive, oh, how did I feel when I checked in that day? Oh, wow, I actually felt a little lighter. I was more engaged. I was more mindful with my meals, so even when you exercise, pay attention to that positive reward, because that's what fuels you to continue that habit.
Absolutely. And then it's a whole healthy drive instead of an overdrive.
Right.
I love it.
Right.
Before we wrap up, where can listeners find you? I will have all of the ways to get a hold of you in the show notes, but just for people listening that don't want to take a peek, where can they track you down?
Yeah. I love connecting with people on Instagram if they're on there. And I put valuable content out there all the time, and people message me and ask me, advice and things. And so, just my Instagram, Jaclyn, JACLyn_Bacon, like the meat. So that's always fun. And then just my website. So JaclynBacon.com.
You have given us so much gold today, Jaclyn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was so fun.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.